Quincy Coleman once again from the Black Pride Movement, doing a special part in our 25-part web series, somewhat of a debate or conversation with my boy Wayne here on race relations from the perspective of a Caucasian, African American, Christian, somewhat of a black nationalist type of religious view. And we want to see if we can't point out or discuss some of the problems and how him and his people feel, and some of the problems with how me and my people feel on the problems that we face today in America. So I want to start by saying I feel like a lot of, of course you could understand how we feel as black people when you see on the news us being shot down and no action being taken against it. And we also feel like we have become a permanent underclass in this country where no matter how high we rise, we're still not respected the way we want to be respected. I was at Savior's Day the other day, and Brother Farrakhan, who was a millionaire and the leader of the Nation of Islam, told a story. He said he was at a millionaire's house in New York. He's a white guy. And he said he called him by his first name. He said, white folks, you never reach a high enough level where white folks give you that level of respect that you want. And I think that's how we feel in this country. Like, we've been through so much, and we still can't get, what we need. Yeah. And I want to see how you feel about that and how you feel about what's going on.
Yeah, and I think one of the big, underlying problems behind that is, for those of us who grew up in predominantly white areas, especially in the Detroit area, in the suburbs, there's this myth that we live in a post-racial society, that racism ended either with the end of the Civil War or civil rights fixed any of the leftover problems, and now, our generation doesn't have to deal with those problems anymore. And that really reflects the fact that for the average kid growing up in a white suburban house, you're not faced with the narratives that you know on a daily basis. We don't have to experience the things that you've experienced. We don't hear the news stories that you might hear. And for that reason, unless there's an opportunity or a moment where we step outside of our cultural bubble, we are not forced to take those problems seriously. And since no one really wants to jump into the mess of somebody else, especially if it's going to mess up their own life, I
think it's important that you say that, because I think, like I was saying earlier, you hear me say the white man is the devil. I don't mean that the devil is that he's a literal devil, because I don't think they're just inherently evil. I think their culture is, if you look through history, inherently evil. But I do think that it's not so much they sitting at a table somewhere saying, how do we destroy this group of people? But I think it's so much, if we help this group of people, we can't, because we're going to lose out. They've gotten so used to white privilege, as you said, that they don't want to deal with it because it'll take away from their success,
Yeah, it's true. And that's for those who even recognize the injustice and the discrepancies.
And some don't.
Because it takes work to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and recognize that. And not everyone feels the need to go through that work. So I would say that, because you're right, it perpetuates this system that keeps, for instance, your family at a certain place that my family would be able to surpass. So it perpetuates that injustice and perpetuates what is really an evil system.
And it's not, when you say suburbs, I want to make everybody clear, it's not an economic thing, because you can have as much money as you want. You come from a very well-off family. It doesn't matter. You can never get out of your situation with money, just because you are rich, just because you have a nigga with a degree, as they say, is still a nigga with a degree, You can be as rich as you want, but to them, or to the system, you'll never be looked at as, like Henry Gates. He was a Harvard professor. He tried to get in his house. The police arrested him. He said, this is my house. They said, no, you don't live here. You remember that story? And Obama had them both to the White House for tea. So you have to understand it's not an economic thing. It's not a suburb Detroit thing. I think it's more of a, and I see what you mean where the suburbs could play a role because you're separate.
Right.
But it's not
that's more what I'm getting at.
But it's not a wealth or poverty thing. It's a racial thing.
I mean, the two are intertwined a lot, but yes. I
agree with that. Because, it helps to have money.
Right.
It helps.
Right.
But it doesn't solve the underlying problem. You can't really buy away the problem. What do you think the solutions are?
Yeah, and this kind of gets more into, the religious influence in all of this for me.
Let me get to my solutions first.
Please.
You'll feed into yours.
Please.
And tell me why you think my solutions are wrong. My solutions,
okay.
Of course. My solution for black man. There's a couple of solutions, but my major solution is, and I know Wayne heard me talking about it, and he disagrees, and I'm sure everybody will disagree. It's gotten to the point in America, at least in America, in my opinion, where it has gotten so bad where you can shoot a black kid, have a trial, and get off, that black people need to stand up for themselves and use any means they have to stand up for themselves. Because when Trayvon Martin was shot, we marched and everything, you know, that didn't really help. But when Rodney King was beat, we were dragging white folks out of cars and killing them. And then they passed laws to say, okay, police brutality laws right after, as a direct result of that. So people, not just white people, but black people, you understand your mama, you do something wrong, your mama hits you. You understand that better than she would. Oh, don't do that again. I think it needs to be a swift reaction by the black community. And if it takes violence, it takes violence. Because we've been trying this. Marcus Garvey tried leaving. Martin Luther King tried being peaceful. You know. And Malcolm didn't really get off the ground with his movement, but you know, we've never tried. Just like, no, you're not going to treat us that way, because if you kill us, you know, we'll kill you. Dr. Khalid Muhammad, he was a very famous guy. I don't necessarily agree with him, but he said we need to kill their babies. And I said, why kill their babies? He said, because they're going to grow up to oppress our babies. Because it's a generational thing that it doesn't seem to solve the problem. And it's getting to the point where, you know, when 50% of blacks live in poverty across the country, and when 80% of blacks in the city live in poverty, I mean, what do we really do other than take action, you know? Because if I slap you in the face right now, you're going to hit me back, you know? You're not going to say, well, let's just figure this out, you know? And you might, but if I keep slapping you in the face, you know, what do we do?
Well, that kind of brings up, I mean, I'm sure this is a criticism you've heard before, too.
Yeah.
Like, if I slap you and you slap me back, I'm unlikely to say, oh, we should probably just stop slapping each other.
Right. Somebody has to kill the other one. You cannot, you're right. That's the point. You cannot coexist with your enemy. Because if you slap me, I slap you, it's going to keep, you know, keep slapping. And I hate to see it get that far, because nobody should have to, nobody should have to die over anything. As a loss of life is always terrible. But even in, you know, sometimes, you know, you got to.
So where does that end, though?
It ends when one of our races are no longer here.
So just the elimination, and if...
Genocide?
So, I didn't expect that to be your answer. When you have a homogenous society, then, if you can commit a kind of genocide that eliminates everything except for one ethnicity, what's to keep that ethnicity from dividing on itself in other ways?
I wouldn't say one ethnicity, brother. I would say the issue, of course we have issues with other ethnicities, of black men being oppressed by everybody. Hispanics own slaves, and the Indians own, Native Americans own slaves. But the ethnicity that is most destructive to the blacks at this point in time are the people of European descent. So that ethnicity, and I don't mean across the world, I guess, because European countries are still oppressing countries in Africa. So across the world, it needs to be a, you know, that's where, I'm not saying that's where I'm at. That's where most black revolutionaries are at this point, because we feel like we've tried everything. A man marched through white cities and got beat up to try to deal with the problem that way.
Yeah.
And he shot him, they killed him, and then we still not where we should be.
Yeah.
And we got a black president for what, 6 years now? And the condition has still not been improved. It has not been improved. It's not a thing. He's trying, but they're blocking him. You know, the Tea Party Republicans, or conservative Republicans, which is another word for racist, are blocking him. And I'm sure you know that too. And trying to block him everywhere they can. So if we can't do it democratically, what do we do? And in response to your thing about genocide, it's been plenty of times in the European history. I don't know if you heard of Tasmania, where the Europeans have wiped out whole nations. They went into parts of Africa and they wiped out whole tribes. They committed genocide in order to get to where they need to be, because they understood. With the Native Americans, they didn't say we can coexist. They said, okay, we're going to wipe you out. And it's lucky that there's still even a few left. So this has been the European perspective forever.
And it's a bad idea. It was a bad thing for us to have done.
Yeah, I mean,
Now,
What do you think?
Yeah, and I do get your frustration. I don't fully understand it because I haven't had to experience it the same way you have. But so I'm not going to say, here's what I think, here's what I think the black community should do to fix this problem. Because to me, I can only speak to my family.
That's what I agree.
To my
I
neighborhood.
can't speak to your people. I speak
Right.
to my people.
And for me, as far as what should white families do? What should white Americans be doing in the midst of this? For me, that's rooted in my Christian identity. I mean, the Christian story is the story of Jesus, who has the power of God, who is God, setting aside that power for the sake of the oppressed, the marginalized, identifying with their pain and taking out
Which
their
is
pain.
us, right?
Right. And so, for me, as a white Christian, my responsibility is to enter into the pain of people who are unlike myself, to set aside power, prestige, privilege, for the sake of not just saying, "Oh, look at me, I'm suffering for Jesus," but instead saying, "I'm sharing in the suffering of my brothers and sisters."
Like Jesus did.
Right.
I think I was raised as a Christian, and I think that story, although we can debate the origins of that story, and I'm not here to get into that,
Yeah.
is a wonderful story that we all should live by. If it could be lived like that.
Right.
But the problem is, I think as black people, we've been sent to church and said, suffer peacefully, because, Jesus is with you.
Right.
And then we've been the ones that have been getting messed over.
Right.
While
And this story isn't even frequently told in
It's not.
white Christian churches.
And it's told in black churches because they don't, like I said, if you ever go to a white church service, it's not the same as ours. They're telling you it's going to get better after a while. Just wait on it. Wait for Jesus to come back.
Mm.
And it's a different.
Right.
And that's why I think Christianity is destructive for blacks. Not because the true story of Christianity is destructive, because it's not. It's one of the most beautiful stories ever.
Mm.
Jesus is wonderful. But the way it's been taught has been so destructive to black culture through history that I don't think anybody should really follow it. Not because it's not true, but because it's just so destructive.
Right. Well, and it's such a powerful story.
Yes.
And unfortunately, there have been groups who have taken the power of that story and held on to it to support themselves. Instead of following the footsteps of Jesus and saying, any power we have is meant to be poured out for the sake of others. And so, again, coming from my Christian community, coming from the white community, we entirely miss the point of Christianity if we use it to support ourselves and to perpetuate our own comfort.
I agree.
So, again, I can't, and I don't have any interest in telling your family what to do, or your neighborhood what to do. And I don't have influence for good reason to you or to your family. But I can influence my family. I can influence my church. And one of the ways I would like to influence my church is to say, if we're actually going to follow Jesus, we're going to follow Jesus into the city, not to change the city, not to fix the problems, but to see through the eyes of somebody else and to share actually in the suffering of a community that's suffering.
I remember you said to me, if we can kill each other or we can get your family to be hurt when something happens to my family.
Right.
And I agree with that. I don't want anybody to go out there and kill anybody. And I think that's the wrong way to go about it. But I do believe if it keeps going down that road, we're going to have to do something to that effect. I do believe everybody should have the right to defend themselves if threatened with harm, and that's whites, blacks, and anybody. But I want to clear up some stuff as well. I'm not saying that violence is the only answer, but I'm saying that if something is not done to solve the race problem, violence is going to happen. And it's happened. You look at the 60s, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X were assassinated. That's violence on a small scale. So one day, and we had Detroit riots we talked about, it's going to be violence on a bigger scale. If something is not done, I'll give you a perfect example of what I want to think about. What could set it off? Belle Isle is a state park now, and it costs to get on. Belle Isle is on the east side. East side is a lot of people don't have money. I remember sometimes when me and my friends go to Belle Isle, you got $10 to your name, you go, you get 2 beers, you get some sweet, you get some candy, you get some McDonald's, and you drive on Belle Isle every day. We don't have $11 a car to pay. I might, but not everybody has $11 a car to just give away money. And so the state taking that is going to make it less urban and make it a state park and make it, so people are going to be like, you know what, it's a black city. We've been going to Bell all our lives. You need to let us on. Then they'll say, no, you got to pay. And then okay, I got to pay. We got ignorant people, bow. And then before you know it, bow. And then before you know it, now we all going down to Belial because one of our brothers was killed. And it could pop off that way. So I think if something is not done to have a respect for black people, and I think that's part of it, a respect for what we have, what we own, what we do, our traditions, then it could get violent. And if it gets violent, I don't advise that anybody shy away from that because we've been shying away from violence too long. If it gets violent, you have to defend yourself. But hopefully it won't get violent. I'm not saying we should go out and get violent.
Right.
But if it comes to that, historically, your people have always been okay with violence too, American Revolution and everything else.
Right, which again is kind of at the center of if my family is trying to live according to the story of Jesus and the crucifixion of Jesus in particular. That means if things get violent, we are on the side of suffering alongside those who are the victims of that violence. We won't, I won't be on the side of the violence. But if someone's hurting you, it's my call to hurt alongside you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I think that's a wrong message, brother. Because what you're telling us is, look, brother, I'll just get beat up with you. No, you want to fight with me? We'll fight together. But we ain't getting beat up no more. We're not gonna hurt together. We're gonna defend ourselves together. You know what I'm saying? We're gonna hurt together. Why would we hurt together? We could defend ourselves together. I mean, when the Bible talks about violence a lot, brother. God was doing some pretty violent things to people. There's one verse in the Bible that says, just as you have spilled our blood, you will be giving your own blood to drink in abundance. So the Bible talks about violence, but I like that attitude. Please come help us. But we don't want to send a message out to black people that you have to suffer.
And I'm not.
We're not going to suffer with you. We're going to help you.
Yeah.
And that's why I have so much of a problem with, I grew up Christian. And I really was I have a Bible verse tattooed on me. I think the Bible is an excellent book. But I don't advise anybody to truly follow it the way it is now, because it is destructive to your Pan-Africanist spirit. It makes you a docile, submissive bunch of people. And religion is deification of one's culture. And so I think Christianity now, even though it took place in the Middle East and Jesus was historically not white, you know that, is you paint him as that, but I don't blame you because everybody wants to look at themselves.
I personally don't.
I'm them, you don't, brother.
Right.
But it's the deification of one's culture. It's raising up a culture and making God. So if I'm going to worship anything, I'll go back and I'll see those pyramids that my ancestors left before any of this, 3,000 years ago, that has been here before us and will be here after we die. And I worship them, or I'm not going to use the word Allah for God, because that's an Arabic word. I'm not going to use the word God for God. That's an English word. Or Yahweh, because it's a Hebrew word. I'm going to find the African word for God, and I'm going to use that, because it's important that we stick to our culture. And I think Christianity, even though it's part of as blacks, it's a good story. The way it's taught is just so destructive to black culture. So destructive. And the way it's shown. You can't go into a church and find a black Jesus. Even though it says in Revelations he had the hair of wool and skin of black and bronze.
Right.
And you don't teach that.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying. To me, helping my church see beyond the cultural picture of Jesus we have to who Jesus actually is and was.
And I think I think that's good. But why do we have to see beyond the cultural picture? I want my people to see the cultural picture, because when you see a black Jesus, you say, hey, that guy was who they worship, and he looks just like
Yeah,
me.
I'm not saying let's find Jesus without culture.
Yeah.
Instead, I'm saying find a God who both transcends culture, but also is expressed in multiple cultural perspectives. And for me to see Jesus through your eyes is to see Jesus more fully than he would be otherwise. And I don't want to just focus this on theology and talk.
But I get what you're saying. That's a good point.
So if we only worship our culture and our deification of our culture, then it's going to be my God versus your God. And that's why we're going to get violence. But if I can see my God in your culture, if I can see Jesus in the black community, then my allegiance to Jesus and the family that we then share as God's children it makes the violence it kind of takes the sting out of the violence.
It does to an extent. I'll give you a story. No offense to the Nation of Islam, because they're my brothers, and I think what they're doing is excellent, and they help more black people than anybody else. Of course, I was at the mosque the other day, and I just felt compelled to leave, and so I left. And my girlfriend asked me why, and I said because I don't want to hear anybody trying to use God for their own cultural gains. Because I feel like, you know, if you guys did it and then we do it, you know, God was black, God was white. You know what I'm saying? So I went to a Catholic church, and I just sat down and I worshiped with whites. And I know, and I still felt the same when I was in there. I was like, you guys know you evil bunch of people, but we didn't talk about that. We worship together. And then when we leave, we can, I don't want to kill each other, hate each other. I think that I do agree to an extent that God should be left out of it, to an extent. That's why I try to push away from don't really leave your religion at home, you know what I'm saying? Because, you know, because I do agree with you on that. We can't, we have to make your God our God, so our gods aren't fighting. But I don't think to an extent, I don't think this has anything to do with God. I think this is a matter of when you're shooting black kids, we got to defend ourselves. I think, because God, we could talk about God all day. Some people don't even believe in God.
Right.
So that's irrelevant, but they believe, and when you point a gun at them, you know?
Yeah.
And so I see what you're saying about God. It bothers me, because I'm finding myself at this point right now, too, brother. And with God, and you are, everybody is, but you can't bring God into it, because it's nothing to do with God right now. God is God. This is what we dealing with on earth, if you get what I'm saying.
I do. I mean, and I don't want to focus too much on that, so I will just say as an aside, for me it has everything to do with God, because to me, God isn't just a passive observer of all of this violence, but God is actively moving to bring about reconciliation, to put an end to the violence, put an end to the tension, to restore relationships and all of that. Now that said, and the reason why it really matters to me is because I've seen so many white Christians. I mean, if we're talking about white culture in America, it's predominantly Christian.
Yes.
Identify with that story. So that's our story, that's our religion, that's who we are, that's our community. And yet, those same people are the ones organizing lynchings. And that's not the most common thing.
The Klan burns a cross to show the light of Jesus Christ. I'm like, what? You know what I'm saying?
Right. And so I think
and that's why I'm pushing, and we don't wrap it up, but I want to say that's why we push back so much, because if we all just want to be Christians and we love each other, brother, go get it. We'll turn in our guns for Bibles. You turn in your guns for Bibles. We can do it, but that's what bothers me. It's the most Christian people, you know, who hate us the most,
right?
And then they want us to be Christian. You know, we're gonna get you back on the show next week. I appreciate this debate.
Thanks.
And race relations, everybody. So we're gonna.